good game feel is often the difference between an okay game and a great game. An okay game has working buttons. A great game makes mashing majestic. But adding all this detail can be daunting when it's hard enough to get a game working in the first place. An ideal tool would keep implementation simple while providing oodles of feedback. Which brings us to springs. Officially, springs are a mechanism that produces a restoring force when stretched or compressed. For our purposes though, springs keep an object at a specified position. We can imagine the object and the destination are connected by a literal spring. If we move the object to the left or the right, the spring will apply forces until the object reaches the goal position. We can set this goal position whenever and wherever we want, and the spring will update accordingly. Code-wise, we love Ryan Juckett's implementation, which is linked in the video description below. This function has 6 parameters. The first 2, position and velocity, track the state of the spring. Since they use the ref keyword, we expect the spring code to make changes to these values. After calling the spring code, we can use these values as is. The function will keep the position and velocity up to date. Next we have the equilibrium position, which is just the spring's goal position. Delta time is, well, delta time. We pass this in so the spring can perform the necessary math. The last 2 values, damping and frequency, are what we're most interested in. These 2 determine how a spring behaves. Damping controls how springy the movement should feel. When the damping is 1, there will be no overshooting or rebounding. The object will land exactly at the rest position. When the damping is 0, the spring will bounce indefinitely. The object will never come to rest. Frequency controls how strong the movement is. A low frequency means the spring is less reactive when making changes. A high frequency will cause the spring to explode at the slightest change. Though it's only 2 parameters, each has a distinct flavor. Should the motion be bouncier or not? Should the motion have more power or less? This is great for fine-tuning the behavior since there's no guesswork. We either blame the damping or frequency and then make the change. With some practice, you'll develop a springy sixth sense of what a damping of 0.75 means or what a frequency of 5 feels like. Enough theory. Let's implement something. Chances are you'll eventually need a button in your game. A spring will add lots of personality and thrives on player input, all while keeping our code blissfully unaware. By the way, we'll be putting all of our motion code into a single function called onSpringValue for the rest of this video. When the spring is updated, we can pass the latest value into this function. This helps isolate the code to visuals component and lends itself to optimizations down the line. We'll start with the press state. When the button is down, we want the red button section to move down as well. This motion will be controlled by the spring. Code-wise, the button logic is in place. When we have input, the button is down, and when we don't have input, the button is up. We'll use the same state to set the height. When the button is down, we'll use the depressed height, and when it's up, we'll use the raised height. Now we need to turn this value into motion. We can directly map the spring value onto a vertical position, and it works. With some damping changes, let's lower it for some more bounciness. And frequency changes, let's turn this up for more oomph. We suddenly have a pretty satisfying motion. If we press or release the button during motion, the animation doesn't miss a beat. Now let's give the button some squash and stretch. Here we want the button to flatten out when pressed. Using a new spring, we'll update the values in roughly the same place as before. When the button is down, we want the smaller scale, and when the button is up, we want to return to normal. Spring side will map this value onto the Y scale. Looking good. We can amplify this feeling by stretching out X and Z as Y gets smaller. Here we take the Y delta and apply it in the opposite direction to X and Z. Looking real good. Once again, we can fine-tune these spring values, lower damping for more bounce, up the frequency for more power, and we got ourselves one boisterous button. Those springs may seem limited at first, you'll soon start to see applications just about everywhere. Let's go back to our button example and add an attract animation, like bouncing the button to get the player's attention. We can actually just reuse the existing squash and stretch animation by nudging the spring's velocity. No new motion code required. For this, we add a nudge value to the current velocity, and in the next spring update, we'll run with it. Because this doesn't affect the rest position, we can run the attract code without worrying about the press state. The button can be bounced while up or down or anywhere in between. Sometimes we may want to set a position instantly rather than waiting for the spring to resolve. To strengthen the press, we can make the down action instant. Because we want the button to be down right away, we set the spring's current position to match the goal position. And because we want this to be instant with no fall off, we also need to reset the spring's velocity. This doesn't quite feel powerful enough though, so rather than nulling out the velocity, we can set it to another nudge value that will provide some additional feedback. Much better. Springs also allow us to animate objects beyond just two values. For instance, if we wanted this button to slide along a track, we can set up a spring that moves it left and right. When the player moves their finger, we set the spring to the X position every frame and watch it move right along. If we want the button to slot into specific positions when released, we can round the spring value on the up event. Again, we get to maximize fidelity with next to no impact on the code state. Mapping motion onto a line like this has endless applications. We can make a speech bubble grow and shrink with player input. If they press the button rapidly, we could increase the scale with each tap. And then on each tap, we could nudge the spring so that when the element is at its maximum size, there's still feedback. Then we can toss on a spring for alpha, and we're in business. Another useful pattern is setting up follow springs. Here the spring is updated to match the object's position every frame, creating a satisfying trail motion. We can also use the spring's velocity or lag for secondary motions. The delta could be used to rotate the object, or even used for squash and stretch. So far, these examples have all been in one direction. By adding another spring, we can move in two. We can make an object follow the player's mouse, or we can give that object any destination. This is great for camera systems, since we can frame whatever we want and not worry about jerky transitions. Plus, we can nudge this value for some screen shake. Using 2D springs in local space is a great way to add fidelity to a blocky system, like cells in a match 3 grid. When the finger is down, we can match the position, and when the finger is lifted or a cell is swapped, we can return to 0, 0. We can reuse this simple spring for grid-wide effects like explosions. We take the delta between the two objects and push in that direction. Then we can use the distance to adjust the strength and timing of the nudge until we get the grid feeling just right. We can use multiple 2D springs for even more complicated animations, like attaching one to each end of a meter. Depending on where objects hit the meter, we can push down on either side as needed. On the visual side, we'll place the meter at the middle point between the two ends and rotate to match the orientation. And since springs are so granular, we can even adjust the overall strength depending on the fill. This way a fuller meter has a better chance of catching the player's eye. Now that we have a better handle on what springs can do, there's a mental model shift that will make springs dramatically more reusable. In this video, when we wanted something to move 500 units right, we set the spring's resting position to 500. But if we also want to update the object's rotation, scale, or alpha with that motion, we would need a spring for each component. Instead, we want to drive this entire sequence with a single spring and move the specifics into different scripts. But we need to rethink the motion in terms between 0 and 1. Let's show this by implementing one of our video titles. We'll set up the basic spring and imagine the sequence as the values -1, 0, and 1. -1 will be the beginning of the intro, 0 will be the normal position, and 1 will be the end of the outro. The movement script is as simple as multiplying the spring value by a factor. This makes for easy tweaks as we fine-tune this effect. By changing the factor, we can make the element move closer or further away. We can even flip the direction of motion with a negative factor. For scaling, we'll need to massage the spring values a little more. If we just use a factor like before, we'll notice that the behavior is inverted. Everything starts backwards, then scales to 0, and then becomes normal. A negative factor just reverses this effect, so no dice. Instead, we can get rid of the upside down portion by taking the absolute value of the spring before applying the scale. And because we know that the spring value now will always be between 0 and 1, we can reverse the scale using a lerp, with the first value being the default scale and the second the intro-outro scale. We can use this same methodology to adjust the alpha. We'll take the absolute value of the spring, remap the values with the lerp, and we're golden. If we want more control, we can use an animation curve to fine-tune this effect. A nice big section of full alpha around 0, with rapid drop-offs at -1 and 1. Getting in the habit of normalizing your spring values between 0 and 1 essentially turns your springs into APIs that any number of scripts can plug into. We can mix and match these motions as needed. Just use one to move, just use one to scale, or combine them all for a compound effect. It should be clear by now, we love springs. They make adding detail easy and are second to none for handling player input. It's worth saying out loud, game dev is hard work. You barely have enough time to get things functional, much less having the spare cycles to properly polish. Finding reliable tools that simplify implementation and amplify iteration are essential. When changes are easy to make, we're more likely to actually make those changes. A million tiny adjustments often takes a game from feeling okay to feeling great. Thanks so much for watching. Let us know what uses you find for springs. If you like this video, the best way to support us is picking up our game Very Valet. We have a brand new update, new platforms, and a price drop coming very soon, so be sure to check it out.